Okay, I think I'm live. Um, I got a weird message that said that a live stream was not available right now, but I hope it works now. Okay, so welcome back to Karim Talks About Economics. It's episode number 19. For our concurrent viewers, you'll know that this is a little bit earlier than usual, and it is so because I have to do something later today. But regardless, this is very important for me, and therefore I am doing the podcast a little bit earlier today. Okay, so Karim Talks About Economics is a podcast where I am the host, Karim, and I talk about economics. Um, or I talk about different things and try to relate them into economics. You get an idea on my worldview, and sometimes we have other people with us, and then you get also their perspective and their take on the world. Now, economics is about how the world is made up and how it works, and therefore it's easy to relate things to economics. Now, I try to do that explicitly sometimes into figures and numbers and the concepts that is in economics, and sometimes it becomes more general of people's behavior and the like. If we don't have an individual with us, then we read from this book currently, and at some point in the future we'll be reading from another book, but for now, it's this book. It's the one that made Adam Smith the father of economics. It's The Wealth of Nations. It's a book that, as people have discovered with us for the past 18 episodes, is a book that you can always relate back to. It's some concepts that will exist forever. It's some basic understandings of the world. Now they can also be criticized with today with today's development in the world and the new technologies that has emerged, such as the internet, which is actually something that we will be discussing um, in this podcast at some point. So the podcast is characterized by being spontaneous, informative, and open-minded. Now, the podcast is spontaneous because it's not a presentation, but it's more of a discussion. So some preparation does go into making this podcast and preparing it. However, the vast majority or the vast major part of this podcast is me spontaneously talking. And when I have people with me, that's also a little bit spontaneous. Now, that allows us to go through some avenues that and think about things that I had not prior to this podcast episode thought about, right? So it's a good thing, I suppose. Where it might also turn to a bad thing if I say something that's wrong. However, with this uh, discussion that I have with myself and with you, these anomalies and these wrong thinkings might spark something, right? You say something wrong not because you want to say something wrong, but sometimes it's because you really thought something very fast, right? However, then you return back to it because when you've said something that's wrong, you know, you kind of, or when you've said something that you're a little bit unsure of, it kind of sticks in the back of your brain and you keep thinking about it. So that's why this podcast is spontaneous, such that we can get more knowledgeable, which directly relates to the other characteristics of this podcast, that it has to be informative. Now, it can be funny, it can be me just talking to friends and entertaining you guys and entertaining myself and a waste of time. However, I need to create some value. I try to push myself to think about things that I've not thought about, and therefore you get, while it is rough, there's also some new things that we talk about, right? And that's why you will have these pauses, right? And that's where I kind of think, not kind of. That's where I think because I have to make up my mind or know where am I really going. Like yesterday, we had the discussion with about the negative interest rates. That really frustrated me because I cannot really understand them. I cannot really grasp the idea of their existence, right? Now, for the central bank, I do understand why they might exist. However, if you start giving it to the private sector, it really becomes difficult for me personally to understand the cause for their existence there. Okay. And thirdly, the podcast is open-minded, and it's open-minded because I do not constrain myself, right? I said it's spontaneous. So if I think about something, it's not that I will not go through that direction because I think it's too difficult. No, we try. We have to try. And it's also open minded because we try to see things from different perspectives. And that's why I do have some individuals with us. And that's why we read from The Wealth of Nation by Adam Smith. And in the future, in some other books that will also criticize my way of thinking and your way of thinking, I suppose, as well. So, usually, the agenda is as the following. We start with some news, and especially now we look at the pandemic and we discuss the numbers and we look at, well, what's actually happening around the world, if things are getting worse or getting better. Then there is a follow-up from last time, which is usually answering a question that was proposed in the previous podcast. Then there is a reading section, a reading part, where I read for 45 minutes approximately to an hour from The Wealth of Nations. Then, now today it might be a little bit shorter, but let's see. And then there is a summary of the, or instead of the reading, we might have a guest, so that would be an interview, either a virtual interview or a physical interview. I've had both in our, we've tried both, and I think the one that's live, right, where I have an individual with me is of course the one that's best virtually. It does work quite fine, but we cannot really see the expressions on the faces of the individuals, and it doesn't become personal, right? And of course they can just hang up whenever, but that's not what we want, right? Okay, and then after that there is a summary, and there I kind of summarize what we've discussed, and that's also where I come up with the new question. And at the very end there's a Q&A. Now the Q&A session has not really been very active, and that's because not a lot of people know that these podcasts exist, and therefore I don't have a lot of people with me on the podcasts. However, in the future, I do hope that it becomes more active. And I would also be willing to answer questions during this podcast. I can see here on my screen if there is anyone that is asking questions, and that is of course in the comment section. However, there are none. Okay, so I think it's due time that we start. Okay, let's see. So the usual way is that I share my screen and then we look at the numbers. Okay, so starting here with the coronavirus. Now, of course, this is early in the day, so, and the United States has not really put their numbers in, so this number will eventually increase today. And I would not be surprised if it reached, I actually wouldn't even be surprised if it reached 14 million. I'd be sad, but I wouldn't be surprised. That's true. I actually wouldn't be surprised if it reached 14 million. Why? Because that would mean 258,000 new cases. Well, around that number, right? It's a little bit less, but it's around that number. Now, is that number unrealistic? Well, with the current data, with the current infection rates, no, it wouldn't be unrealistic actually, that we have that many cases in one day. especially because we're also early in the day where the United States have not really submitted their data yet, and a lot of countries have also not submitted their data yet. That makes sense. Now, the death rate is at 588,000. That means that there is a small increase from not a small, significant increase from yesterday. However, it's not something that is very alarming. Now, the number of recovered individuals has definitely increased since yesterday. It's now in the 8 millions, which is a good thing, something that keeps us hopeful. Now, with regards to the active cases, there is 1% of those individuals that are now serious or critically ill. Now, in nominal terms, that is 60,000, which is, of course, an increase, as it has been 58 and 59 the past couple of weeks and the past couple of weeks. However, the 1% has not changed, so that's a good thing. Now, with the deaths, it's also 7%. So, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, 7% is 7%. It would, of course, be nice that it would be lower. However, it is not at this current stage. Yes. Usually after this, we consider the different countries. And this is, of course, the data from yesterday. As we see, the US is back at the 71,000 mark, actually very near to 72,000. We see that the new deaths in the US have hit 1,000, which is, of course, not something that is surprising, as now the lag deaths are now creeping up, as we've discussed multiple days in a row now. And yesterday it was also 900. It was only the day where we saw it at 300 that we were kind of questioning what was really happening in the US, right? Were they not counting the deaths, or what was happening? But now we see that maybe it's a lag of registrations. Okay. Now we see that Brazil is at 39,000, which is an improvement. Is it realistic? Is this number realistic? I really don't know. It's not very much smaller than the previous days. That it is alarming, so this is not the weekend bias where they go down to 20,000. But I think the 39 is also too low, as we've not heard about increasing measures in Brazil. So the increased number of infected individuals can only be at downward, can only lead to an increased amount of people also getting infected. It doesn't make sense that the number would suddenly decrease if no measures are put into place. Maybe it's also me that has not looked at the proper news, right? Now, new deaths from Brazil are 1,261. That is very close to what it was yesterday. I think it was 1,300. So not that big of a deal there. It's not that it is much lower or much higher. It's stable now. India, 32,000. Now they are above the 30s, so that's not good. So India is getting worse. It's not getting better, and I would not be surprised if tomorrow they are, i.e. today, at the end of today, they are up at 1 million cases and not this 970,000. 600 new deaths, 614 to be exact. That's also an increase. That's an increase because they have stayed at 400 and 500. So that means that really these new cases and the deaths that are related to these new cases are creeping up. Now the thing with India is also that it's a quite young population, so it's a little bit alarming that we see this 614, which means that the young people may be not immune to the critical illnesses and the fatality that COVID-19 brings with it. Now, a country that we also consider, or at least with regards to the deaths, is Mexico. Mexico is now back at the third place, as I said yesterday and the day before. It was a little bit weird that they were that low in the deaths, but now we see that it's back at 800. Um, yes, is that good or bad? Well, not good, because we also see an increase in the number of new cases. It's now at 7,000. So also in Mexico, the situation is getting worse. South Africa, we thought it was getting better. However, now they're back at nearly 13,000 new cases. Now the deaths are quite good, but however, that's because um, maybe there is some misinformation there, firstly, and secondly, it's because they have really increased faster than any of the other countries below it. As you can see, they are the only one that is 5 digit beside the three at the very top. So it would not be surprising if they surpassed Mexico, and at the end of this week also surpassed Chile and maybe also Peru. However, it would be a stretch if no, it wouldn't be a stretch if they overcame Peru. So at the top five, I would expect South Africa by the end of the end of the week is actually tomorrow, but or you could argue Sunday, but we know that there is a information by Saturday, Sunday, so maybe at Monday or Tuesday next week they would be at number five. But let's see. Now we see at the very bottom, Argentina is creeping up. Well, creeping up with 4,000 new cases, and they have actually been at that number for quite some time now. And remember, from the beginning of this podcast, so even in episode number 1, the one at number 20 was Canada. Now that has been surpassed by Argentina, and that's because Canada has put in some measures, and Canada only had 200 cases a day or something like that, right? So it is alarming, of course, with 200. However, it's a large country, and hopefully they will be able to work around that. Now the U.S., I'm very very skeptical about that country, because now they have hit the 140 mark, right? And that's not good. That's not good. I would not be surprised if they hit 200,000 now, right? We were very surprised if they would hit 200,000 at the beginning, because it really started to go well for them. But now I really think they should put on some measures again, which of course relates to economics, that there is a trade-off between health and wealth, apparently in the US. So yeah. Okay, let's look at the news. I'm just going to take it randomly. Okay, so there are two newses here that you will be seeing. Okay, two newses here that we will also be seeing in other news agencies, which is firstly that Russian spies have targeted coronavirus vaccine, and this one, that an ISIS fighter has now been granted access to the UK to get her trial in the UK instead of down in Syria. Okay, so firstly this news, because it relates to relates to COVID. Okay, so what does it say? It says that the Russian spies have tried to hack information about the creation of a coronavirus vaccine, and that's of course because Russia, or I would assume that the intent is to copy and know exactly how far the West is with developing a vaccine, as they also see the need to create a vaccine, because as we just saw together, Russia is at number 3 and they have a constant of 6,000 new cases every single day, which is of course a little bit unrealistic because it cannot stay that constant for so long. Now, of course, it would be nice if it could, but I doubt that it can. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, secondly, it's a little bit strange that they have to go and hack, and it also says that it's uh, state-backed hackers. So that means that it is the government that really wants this. So you see that this is really troubling the Russian government. So that's the first part of it, right? Now the second part is that it has been detected by the West. Okay. Now the question is, how long have they been doing that? For quite some time, probably. And we always hear about the Russian hackers. So that always lets us think, well, how much are they really hacking us? Now, I would understand that it's some respect that is important, right? Because there is always talk about hacking with respect to elections. Okay, interesting. And security, of course, and maybe also war and things like that. So you think that is national security. Now, however, this with COVID, I'm a little bit critical about the validity, not of the news, but the validity of the reason of maybe wishing to not share data with Russia just voluntarily. I actually did not think that that countries didn't work together, but apparently that's the case now. It's the case that scientists around the world are, excuse me, around the world have not come together to work together to create a vaccine, because you would think that the vaccine would be the same all over the world, and you would also think that the vaccine doesn't have to be for profit in this case. Why? Well, because this is a deadly disease that will affect the entire globe, and as we know, and also as we talked about yesterday, it doesn't well, firstly, it doesn't make sense that if we're vaccinated here in the West, and then we're not vaccinating people all over the world, because then we can't visit those places as they might still be hit with the COVID-19. Now, the question would also be how good is this vaccine? Because if they can have it and then we are immune to it, I suppose it's fine. But of course, it wouldn't be nice. It wouldn't be ethical, really. So maybe the question here is about profit, right? That you want to profit in selling this to Russia, and probably also to China and other countries. Now the U.S. presidency, I'm not going to talk about that, but that's the news at the bottom center. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not going to talk bad about China. I'm not going to talk bad about the US. I'm just saying that it's probably not the time to do this, to have this trading war. It's not a trading war anymore, but it's kind of, and it's not even a cold war, but it's kind of a commercial war between the two countries. But it's good. It creates competition. So I suppose for now it's good. However, when it starts to be aggressive, or if it starts to be aggressive, I think it should be immediately stopped. Now the question is, how will it be stopped? Because the U.S., well, at least the presidency of the U.S. and definitely also that of China, well, to some degree that of China, does not cohere to international law. It's not to some degree. Well, Chinese actually don't, um, but neither does the U.S. And we saw that they just went out of the Paris Agreement, and they also went out of the World Health Organization for now. So we see that international cooperation is on the down low, or is moving downwards. Now, that was just a small break from the other big news today, or at least for now, because I'm sure that, yeah, later in the evening there's going to be some other headline news. But for now, the other headline news is the one that the ISIS fighter that went voluntarily and became a bride in Syria. Oh, she was from the UK and she went to Syria. I think she was 16 or something like that, maybe even young. I don't know if she was younger because it says here that she's 20 now. However, she wants to return now, and she wants to return because, of course, the war is done. However, and her argument is that I want my safety. I want to be. If you want to imprison me in the UK, and I'm a UK citizen. You can't just leave me be here. Now, the argument for the UK politicians not wishing to bring her back is that and also Denmark has done the same, I think, is that when she chose to go to Syria and become a bridesmaid, she made uh, a decision. Well, because we know that ISIS is an organization that hated the West and wanted to bring war on the West. Well, that was basically treason. So the argument is that she it's treason what she did, and therefore she does not deserve to come back. Now, when she comes back, there's no death row for such things. Um, Now the question is, can she be questioned for war crimes? Um, is it a case of war crimes that she went down there? Did she know of what they were doing? That's also a question. Her argument may be that I just wanted to be a part of an Islamic group. I didn't know that they were killing and slaughtering people. Now, that's a big statement because it doesn't really make sense because that was their entire slogan. Um, so it would be interesting to see what's gonna happen, and if she does come back, right, and she's allowed this fair trial. Well, firstly, we'll be hearing some new news if she tells the truth. If she doesn't, we'll not be hearing the news. Some new things. Well, I think that we will be hearing new things about what was happening in ISIS from her. So that would give us some information into how they were operating and how we can stop them from reappearing once again. On the other side, it also starts to question what about all the other fighters, right? Now, on the positive side, that also improves the European um, standing, as now they would not be blackmailed by Turkey for keeping and control and really holding these prisoners back from Europe. So that's the first part of it. However, the question is, well, what will happen with the prison population in Europe if these people come back? Because they will most definitely be put into prison. The question is about how many years, and the question, well, will they ever be reintegrated into the society in Europe? And what if they come here, but their mentality continues? Or what if they continue this mentality inside the prisons, right? So firstly, what if it continues inside the prisons, and then what if when they are put back into the society, they still continue this line of thinking? So yeah, that's a question to be had. That's definitely a discussion to be had. Now to the other news source, you see again Russian hackers, and again the ISIS fighter. Again, as you can see, yeah. Then there is a news about the market. The question is for how long can this increase continue? Right, the rally in the stock market because the stocks have been increasing for quite some time. Again, Russian hackers. Now, a new study here, however, and this is from The Guardian. Well, firstly, Israel, as I've mentioned on multiple days, Israel has already got the second wave, which is not a good thing. The question is it really Israel or have they started to count Palestine? That's my question. Okay. And also annexing the Palestinian part, I don't understand how that will work. Like in COVID-19, it's really not the time for it, right? Because you need to stay indoor. And what does it mean to annex? Does that mean just to go somewhere else? Or will you compensate them by giving them a place to stay? I don't know how that works. However, that's a lengthy discussion that I think we'll be having a different day when that news is when that is in the news again. Yes. So a new study from Italy, I think, yes, from Italy, says that 89% of the pandemic deaths was a direct cause from COVID-19. So that goes against the idea that it's just old people that dies, right? So it's healthy old people that die. That's not something that we want. So it's not underlying conditions and things like that that cause the deaths, but it's really having COVID-19. Now, of course, the other thing also helps. However, it's not only the underlying health conditions. So, yeah, you might die regardless. So don't just say I'm young and I'm strong. Again, the news here. Again, right? And no, the other news is not here. Okay, this is a little bit weird that they have it twice, Al Jazeera, but it is what it is. I think that's it. I think that's it for the news section. So thanks for holding on with me. Yes. Back to my face. Okay. So what now, you think? Well, now we're done with the news. Now it's time to the question from yesterday. What was the question, you may ask? Here we go. And here is the idea that we might have diverged from the ideas in the Wealth of Nations, and that needs to be corrected, right? Because these ideas are perfect, they are pretty good. However, they need to be evolved, built upon. They need to be put into perspective into today. So the question is, how has the internet contributed to the employment of capital? And remember, yesterday we started a new chapter of the employment of capital, where Adam Smith started out with saying that there are 4 ways that you can employ capital. And that is either by root production of goods for consumption, so agriculture and the like. It's manufacturing for consumption. So that means making the raw materials into something that is consumable, that's a little bit better. It might be a phone, it might be this pen, it might be a lot of things. Thirdly, you had transportation. So that's the wholesales, right? So that means that instead of having this pen, you have thousands of these pens. And you take them from the manufacturer and then you distribute them among different stores. So that's transportation, or maybe from one country to another. Then you have the division into particular portions, I think it says. Yeah, to particular portions. So that's retail. I think transportation is basically. I think I was wrong with transportation. Transportation is just wholesale. It's not dividing them up, but rather maybe having hundreds of thousands and then transporting them from one place to the other. And then we have dividing into particular portions, and that's when you have 1,000 and then you distribute them such that you sell one at a time to one individual at a time. So that's the retail part of employing capital. Now the question is, how has the internet contributed to the employment of capital? What I thought of when I wrote this question was a company such as Amazon or eBay. Well, not really eBay, I suppose, but mostly something like Amazon or all other places on the internet where you can buy stuff, really, right? So right now we have the supermarkets also have these. Does that mean that you get it from that supermarket around the corner? Well, for now, yes. Maybe in the future, not. Okay. So how has the internet contributed to the employment of capital? Well, the idea of wholesale is diminishing, right? Because now you can sell it directly out of the manufacturer and send it out one at a time, because you can sell it one at a time. You can also sell it 100 at a time. You can sell it as many as you want at a time. You can have one individual that wants 99 and another one that wants 9. And a third one that wants 999 or 9,999. Or maybe just 10,000, right? So the idea of transportation, well, that still exists, right? Because you still have these humongous uh, container vessels that still go from one country to the other. However, it's a little bit different because this can carry a lot of different products. It doesn't only carry one specific product. Now, of course, you still have the transportation of one specific product, but really the idea is not the same. So you can sell directly out of the factory now. So maybe the transportation has been cut off to some degree. To some degree, I'm not going to say totally because it's not, but to some degree. Now the question, well, I don't suppose it has cut off actually the transportation, but maybe it has mixed the transportation and the manufacturer. No, but again, Amazon is not, it's not really a transportation. Well, it is to some degree, right? With those new drones. However, I suppose it does use UPS and DHL and whatever it can use, and Post Noir. So maybe it's really not manufacturing that has been cut out, but maybe this dividing into particular product. So this retail idea, this that there is a small shop near you. You don't need the small shop, you can just get it from the internet. Now, of course, that's a little bit, you'd think that the internet is little bit faster. However, that not in this sense. Maybe in the sortiment or in the range of products, yes, it has now increased, and for some companies it has removed this idea of a retailer. However, for others it might not, right? But how has it impacted the employment of capital? Well, again, let's think about Amazon. Amazon is mostly a warehouse. So I think it's this wholesale, right? It buys from the manufacturer and has it in a warehouse in a wholesale. So it's a storage facility. Now the question is, how much of a storage facility is it? Because it's not, maybe it's not really buying the things, but it's renting out the space, right? And also renting out the space online, because they also have their cloud services. So maybe that's also what they're doing, right? So that's also something that we should think about. Of course, I don't know exactly what Amazon is doing. I only know partially what they are doing. However, I have seen some documentaries about their large factories and their cloud services. So there's, from that limited knowledge, what does the internet contribute to the employment of capital? Well, it does really, well, these four things still exist, right? But it has changed the balance between these four parts. So has the internet contributed to the division of particular into particular portions, the retail part? Well, to some degree. Now the range of products that you can get is quite large. Then the question becomes, you're really not buying it from a retailer anymore, you're buying it from a wholesaler, right? That is just selling you things as a retail. So when you buy something from, if you're Danish, something called Matas, I don't think that you're buying it from the shop near you, but you're buying it from a big warehouse and then it's sent to you, right? And also Lego, you can buy it down in the shop. However, if it's sent to you and you order it from the internet, I suppose that you get it from from the manufacturer, from the wholesaler. So the internet has increased the amount of retail products and the things that can be bought on in retail. However, it has limited the business of retailers. So I think less money goes into retailing, but maybe, and hear me out, maybe the retailing has now gone online, right? So do I mean by that? I mean that instead of retailers investing their capital into the shop, they're investing it into a website or into an application on the mobile phone. Okay. Has the internet done anything for transportation, i.e. the wholesalers? Well, yes, we need more space now. There's more products and there's less retailers or direct retailers, and therefore they need more space. Now, with respect to retailers, there are also websites for those, right? To some degree, also people are investing into the internet. Also, some retailers are investing into some wholesalers, excuse me, have invested into the internet. So Alibaba is an example. Now, with respect to transportation, we've also started to invest into these large containers also, but that's not really the internet, right? However, the internet has contributed to the idea that you can buy things all over the globe and not just from countries around you and from people that you know and that you've established an interaction with and you've established a relationship with. You can do it with anyone around the world, right? Okay, so that's great. Now, has capital contributed into manufacturing? Well, definitely, as things can be done online now. You, as I said, there's a lot of computer programs, and those may not be physical on the computer, but they might be in the cloud, and that's internet. That's the internet, right? And what I meant by internet, it's the connectivity maybe also of devices and things like that. Well, to some degree, that is also true, right? What about the root products? Have the internet contributed to that? Well, no, not really. Not really. So the internet has contributed mostly to the last part, at least for me, right? In my personal life, that's how I see it. And I see it that because I'm a consumer. I'm not a producer. I'm not working in a large factory where I can see how much the internet is there, right? However, I know that the idea of a computer has helped a lot with storing data and things like that. But that's not, well, that is to some degree the employment of capital. However, we're talking about internet and not a digital format of cataloging your data, right? So we're talking about the internet, the idea that we can all communicate with one another, and that has mostly contributed. Well, for the root product, it has contributed in the sense that you can actually buy root products from all over the world. However, it has not changed the way that capital is being invested into this industry, I suppose. So it's not because the internet has impacted the farmer a whole lot. Well, maybe he can sell it, but it's not that the farmer is going to invest more money into his farm because of the existence of the internet, right? Maybe the internet has allowed him to sell it faster or more expensive, and he now knows a little bit more about what the market demands, and therefore he will be producing it. However, I think that relates more into the wholesaler, so the transportation. So they will be investigating the market a little bit more, and then buying from the manufacturer, who buys from the root producer of consumable products. Okay. One thing that I came to think about, I forgot it now. Interesting. Yeah, I have a tattoo actually. Yes. Stretch. Okay, so I think that's it for the follow-up from last time. Uh, yes, I'm going to start reading now. I think I'm just gonna skip. Yeah. Okay. And yesterday we finished up by talking about the difference between being a native and a foreigner, and how that related into the employment of capital and where it would be counted and things like that. Okay. It is of more, and we're on page 194, and still on the chapter of the different employments of capitals. Okay. It is of more consequence that the capital of the manufacturer would reside within the country. It is necessarily puts into motion a greater quantity of productive labor and adds a greater value to the annual produce of the land and labor of the society. It may, however, be very useful to the country, though it should not reside within it. The capitals of British manufacturers who work up the flax and hemp annually imported from the coasts of the Baltic are surely very useful to the countries which produce them. Those materials are a part of a surplus produce of those countries, which, unless it was annually exchanged for something which is demanded here, would be of no value and would soon cease to be produced. The merchants who export it replace the capitals of the people who produce it and thereby encourage them to continue the production, and the British manufacturers replace the capitals of those merchants. A particular country, in the same manner as a particular person, may frequently not have capital sufficient both to improve and cultivate all its lands, to manufacture and prepare their whole root produce for immediate use and consumption, and to transport the surplus part either of the root or the manufacturer's produce to those distant markets where it can be exchanged for something for which there is demand at home. The inhabitants of many different parts of Great Britain have not capital sufficient to improve the cultivate all their lands. The wool of the southern counties of Scotland is a great part of it, after a long land carriage, though very bad roads, manufactured in Yorkshire for want of capital to manufacture it at home. There are many little manufacturing towns in Great Britain, of which the inhabitants have not capital sufficient to transport or produce their own industry to those distant markets where there is demand and consumption for it. If there are any merchants among them, they are properly only the agents of wealthier merchants who reside the same of the great commercial cities. When the capital of any country is not sufficient for all those three purposes, in proportion as a greater share of it is employed in agriculture, the greater will be the quantity of productive labor which it puts into motion within the country, as well as will likewise be the value which its employment adds to the annual produce of land and labor of the society. After agriculture, the capital employed in manufactures puts into motion the greatest quantity of productive labor and adds the greatest value to the annual produce. That which is employed in the trade of exportation has the least effect of any of the three. Makes sense? So, as we said yesterday, the employment of capital into agriculture is the one that is most productive and adds the most value, and that's because you have nature that works for you for free. So the sun is for free, and for now the water is also for free, right? Then comes the manufacturer, and that's because they really do add some value, right? As I said with this pen, the making of this pen. However, there's a lot of machinery that has to go in, which has to be paid by capital. So you have to employ a lot of capital to make these machines, and therefore the value added that the individual brings is smaller than that in agriculture. Now, the idea that Adam Smith brings out here is that transportation may actually not bring any value at all. Or at least it's lower than manufacturing and agriculture. The country, indeed, which has not capital sufficient for all those three purposes, has not arrived at the degree of opulence for which it seems naturally destined. And I think this is a star. This is not a star, but a note that I want to write down. That's what I mean by a star. I want to write down that uh, all countries to succeed need to employ capital into colon agriculture, manufacturing, and transport. Okay. Um, to attempt, however, presumably prematurely and with an insufficient capital to do all the three is certainly not the shortest way for society, no more than it would be for an individual to acquire sufficient one. The capital of all the individuals of a nation has its limits, in the same manner as that of a single individual, and is capable of executing only certain purposes. The capital of all the individuals of a nation is increased in the same manner as that of a single individual, by their continual accumulation and adding to it whatever they save out of their revenue. It is likely to increase the fastest, therefore, when it is employed in the way that affords the greatest revenue to all the inhabitants of the country, as they will thus be enabled to make the greatest savings. But the revenue of all the inhabitants of the country is necessarily in proportion to the value to the annual produce of their land and labor. That's a great one. So the revenue of all the inhabitants of the country is necessarily in proportion to the value of the annual produce of their land and labor. So what does this mean? Well, it means that well, what is the revenue of all the individual? Well, that means their earnings, and that is in all forms, I suppose, because it doesn't say exactly what kind of revenue, right? I think I have to read this again because I wasn't maybe 100% sure about it, because this is very important. So the capital of the individuals of a nation has its limits. Why? Why? In the same manner as that of a single individual, and is capable of executing only a certain purposes. The capital, the capital of all the individuals of a nation is increased in the same manner as that of a single individual by their continually accumulate. Okay. The capital of all the individuals of a nation is increased in the same manner as that of a single individual by their continual accumulating and adding to it whatever they save out of their revenue. Okay, it is likely to increase the fastest, therefore, when it is employed in the way that affords the greatest revenue to all the inhabitants of the country, as they will be enabled to make the greatest savings. Okay, that was pretty stupid of me to write this as as the one as the conclusion. It is not. Um, so because the one that is most important is the sentence. This one. I'm gonna read it out loud because this is very, 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 very important. I think in political in for politicians and people thinking about these things. So it is likely to increase. So it relates to capital. So capital is likely to increase the fastest. Then he says, therefore, when it is employed in the way that affords the greatest revenue to all the inhabitants. Or the country. So that's a little bit weird that he says the inhabitants or the country, which of course relates to taxes also, right? So if the revenue increases of the government, that's also good. It might mean tariffs, I suppose. Why? He then argues, as they will thus be enabled to make the greatest savings. But the revenue of all the inhabitants of the country is necessarily in proportion to the value of the annual produce of their land and labor. Okay, so that would mean his argument is that so when capital is employed such that it increases the revenue to the most amount of people, or it produces the greatest amount of revenue increase to the people, to the inhabitants, well, that would be the way to increase capital. So capital should be employed such that it increases the revenue of all individuals. Why? Well, because by increasing the revenue of the people, you increase their saving, and by increasing their saving, you increase the money that they have to, you guessed it, invest. Why do we save? To invest. Or for future generations to invest. Now we're going in a different way, right? Today we're going in a very different way. Most governments, all governments, I would say, have a deficit. No one has a surplus. Everyone has a GDP deficit. Everyone is lending money. But why? In Denmark, it makes sense because the interest rate is negative. And also, it's the government, it's not the people, so I suppose that's okay. Okay, so let's continue. It continues such as the following. It has been the principal cause of the rapid progress of our American colonies towards wealth and greatness. It has been the principal cause of the rapid progress of our American colonies towards wealth and greatness that almost their whole capitals have hitherto. I'm gonna check what that means. So I've never seen this spelling before in my life. Hitherto. Maybe I'm also pronouncing it wrong, as we've discovered that I have in multiple episodes before. Hitherto. Hitherto. Until now, or until the point in time under discussion. Hitherto. So, hitherto been employed in agriculture. In agriculture, they have no manufacturers. Those household and courses manufacturers expected, which necessarily accompany the progress of agriculture and which are the work of the women and children in every private family. The greater part both of the exportation and coasting trade of America is carried on by the capital of merchants who reside in Great Britain. Even the stores and warehouses from which goods are retailed into some provinces, particularly in Virginia and Maryland, belong many of them to merchants who reside in the mother country. Interesting that he says mother country and not Britain. But yeah, interesting, 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 interesting. I'm gonna write that down just for fun. Mother country. Okay, and afford one of the few instances of retail trade and of a society being carried on by the capitals of those who are not resident members of it. Were the Americas either by combination or by any other sort of violence to stop the importation of European manufacturers and by those giving them and by thus giving a monopoly to such of their own countrymen as could manufacturers the like goods divert any considerable part of their capital into the employment, they would retard instead of accelerate. Retard. So retard means slow, doesn't mean that they would be stupid, it would just be slow. That's what retard mean. They would retard instead of accelerate. The further increase in the value of their annual, so you're a retard means that you're slow. Instead of accelerating the further increase in the value of their annual produce, and would obstacle instead of promoting the progress of their country towards real wealth and greatness. This would be still more the case were they to attempt in the same manner to monopolize to themselves their whole exportation trade. So it's a little bit weird then, right? That we see that China is increasing with 8% per year. Because they are only doing manufacturing, they are not doing agriculture. So we would expect that they would have increased even further if it was agriculture that they were exporting. So maybe that's the way forward. Just agriculture. Just do agriculture first, right? Because that's the basic necessary goods, and then export it. Now the question would then occur: well, what can happen if you can't export it? Well, the thing is, you will make it cheaper because if you don't have anything, you're willing to sell it as cheap as possible because it's useless to you. But maybe you're then not allowed to sell it at all. Then it becomes some political obstacles and it's really not good. Okay. The cause of human prosperity indeed seems scarce ever to have been of so long continuance as to enable any great country to acquire capital sufficient for all those three purposes, unless perhaps we give credit to the wonderful account of wealth and cultivation of China and those of ancient Egypt and of the ancient state of Hindustan. Even those three countries, the wealthiest according to all accounts that ever were in the world, are chiefly renowned for their superiority in agriculture and manufactures. They do not appear to have been eminent for foreign trade. The ancient Egyptians had a superstitious antipathy to the sea, a superstition nearly to the same kind prevalent among the Indians, and the Chinese have never excelled in foreign commerce. Opposite to today. Just gonna write opposite to today. Just in case that anyone gets this book and in the future in 200 years, and then China has also closed down on itself again. Now they know that me 200 years prior to that said that, well, they were really into foreign commerce. Okay, so the greater part of the surplus of the surfer, but now it also seems that you have to be a part of this global economy in order for you to strive, right? You can really not do it yourself, but that becomes a problem of ingenuity of the people, right? Because supposedly, if you can make everything yourself, you would be richer. And countries such as China could do it themselves. The question is, well, why do they want to participate in this world, right? Why do they want the capital of the foreigners? It's a really good question, though. It's a really good question, and it can only be accredited to the fact that they want these, that they cannot innovate by themselves, and that they cannot what can they not? Well, they cannot innovate by themselves, otherwise they would. Why does China? And the question was, why does China want to be a part of the global market? If Adam Smith says that you can actually have done this all yourself, just focus on agriculture. So it's a stupid thing to import agriculture, I suppose, and focus on manufacturing. That's pretty stupid, actually. I see it now. I understand him now. it's, it's not that clever. I see that now. I see that now. However, why does China want to be a part of the global economy? Well, it's either because they want to sell to the global economy and thereby increase, but then the question would be, why don't you suffice your own product such that your own people want to demand your product, right? Why do you want to go across borders? Why not be be inside your own country? Well, that's because you can't do it within your country. That means that you don't have the knowledge, the know-how. But the thing is that China started from the bottom when they were really, really poor, right? Interesting. They started from the bottom when they were really poor. Yes, makes sense. No, what I mean is that they started exporting when they were really poor as well and becoming the manufacturers of the world instead of being the agriculture of the world, right? Why? Maybe because they didn't have enough food. So when you didn't have enough food, you started to do manufacturing instead. However, you could have made these people more productive by making them farm. Well, that was what Mao did, right? And that's why you had a famine in China, because you went to manufacturing instead of agriculture. right? Is there anyone with me? Well, currently, no. What I'm doing with my hands is this on the table. Uh, so why does China want to be a part of the global economy? And why have we created this big global economy? Well, that's the idea of trade. But in that world, uh, that's the idea of wholesale. That's you have these four employments of capital, and it's only wholesale that should be treated. It's not manufacturing. Manufacturing should not be transported outside the country, and then you keep the and then you well, if you can keep the raw production in your own country, that would be the, I suppose, in this case, the best thing. And the manufacturing, and then the wholesale, and the retail is necessary in your own country. Otherwise, your population would die and would starve to death. So that would definitely be, and as we also read, that would be in the society. The manufacturing should also be in the same society. So why is it that you're actually producing something in China? Well, because it's cheaper. But why has China ever taken that deal to make it cheaper? Right? Because they can earn some money, so the raw product is the people. Is that what you mean? Is that what you mean to tell me? Because it would be a really bad deal to sell manufacturing and then import food. That's a really bad deal if that's what China is doing. It's not a winning strategy, at least. Okay. Now, it could also be that we don't need any food and therefore they knew that. But why would they want to increase their capital, to invest more into manufacturing or to invest more into agriculture? Maybe it is to get these agricultural tools in order to be able to be more productive in the agricultural landscape. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I hope that that's their strategy. Otherwise, I believe kind of every word that I read in Adam Smith. I'm a little bit critical about some things, but at the end of the day, I don't see something that I can really be very much against here, and that's why I have these arguments as I have. So that's subconsciously why I'm thinking this way. However, I encourage you all to ask me questions and to criticize me and maybe to tell me that I'm wrong in some respects or another. Okay. The greater part of the surplus okay, so now we're back at the Chinese, and the Chinese had never excelled in foreign commerce. The greater part of the surplus produced of all those three countries seems to have always exported by for to have been always exported. The greater part of the surplus produce of all those three countries seems to have been always exported by foreigners who gave in exchange for something else, for which they found a demand there, frequently gold and silver. Okay. It is thus that the same capital will in any country put into motion a greater or smaller quantity of productive labor and adds a greater or smaller value to the annual produce of its land and labor according to the different proportions in which it is employed in agriculture, manufacturing, or wholesale trade. The difference too is very great according to the different sorts of wholesale trade in which any part of it is employed. All wholesale trade, all buying in order to sell again by wholesale, may be reduced to three different sorts: the home trade, the foreign trade of consumption, and the carrying trade. The home trade is employed in purchasing in one part of the same country and selling in another the produce of the industry of the country. It comprehends both the inland and the coastal trade. The foreign trade of consumption, so there's inland trade and there's foreign trade. So home trade and foreign trade. okay, of consumption is employed in purchasing foreign goods for home consumption. The carrying trade is employed in transaction, the commerce of foreign countries, or in the carrying of surplus produce of one to another. The capital which is employed in purchasing of one part of the country in order to sell in another, the produce of the industry of the country, generally replaces by every such operation two distinct capitals that had both been employed in the agriculture or manufactures of the country, and thereby enables them to continue that employment. When it sends out from the resident of the merchant a certain value of commodities, it generally brings back in return at least an equal value of other commodities. When both are the produce of domestic industry, it necessarily replaces by every such operation two distinct capitals which had both been employed in supporting productive labor, and thereby enables them to continue that support. The capital which sends Scotch manufacturers to London and brings back English corn and manufacturers to Edinburgh necessarily replaces by every such operation two British capitals which had both been employed in the agriculture and manufacturing of Great Britain. The capital employed in purchasing foreign goods or for home consumption when this purchase is made with the produce of domestic industry replaces two by every such operation two distinct capitals. But one of them only is employed in supporting domestic industry. The capital which sends British goods to Portugal and brings back Portuguese goods to Britain replaces by every such operation only one British capital. The other is a Portuguese one. Though the return, therefore, of the foreign trade of consumption should be as quick as those of home trade, the capital employed in it will always but one half of the encouragement to the industry or productive labor of the country. But the return of the foreign trade of consumption are very seldom so quick as those of the home trade. The return of home trade generally come in before the end of the year, and sometimes 3 or 4 times in the year. The returns of the foreign trade of consumption seldom come in before the end of the year, and sometimes not till after 2 or 3 years. A capital therefore employed in the home trade will sometimes make 12 operations or be sent out and return 12 times before the capital employed in foreign trade of consumption has made one. If the capitals are equal, therefore the one will give 4 and 20 times more encouragement and support to the industry of the country than the other. The foreign good I think that's it. I think I'm gonna leave the rest for tomorrow because I have to cut it short today, sadly. And tomorrow we're gonna read and actually reach an entirely new book with the name, which is named the following, of the different progress of opulence in different nations. So the first chapter has the following headline, of the natural progress of opulence. Now I need to be entirely sure what opulence means, but I think it means greatness, great wealth and luxuriousness. Okay, so lastly we discussed capital. Yeah, I think that's home trade versus foreign trade. That's the same thing. So suddenly you saw here, well, internet, as we had a discussion about before, has really made these transactions faster, and the faster ships, of course, also. The idea here is that the capital that is employed at home, so in the home country, right? So if I sell it from one part of the country to the other, that happens very quick, and therefore That person will earn it, and then he will employ it fast, and then he would produce something, he would sell it, and then he would earn some more money and he would invest that again, and therefore home trade is faster and the money goes around faster and you can employ capital at a more frequent rate. And once you do that, right, so imagine that you have, but of course the amounts may be smaller, however, imagine that, and that's also why I asked the question, why is China doing this deal with Europe, right? What is their intention? I don't know what their intention is. It doesn't make sense. Firstly, okay, so if you can invest 50 million, 50 billion, let's say 50 billion constantly 20 times in a year, it's much better than you just do it four times a year. And we know that because I said that figure because the transportation of a ship from China to Europe takes 3 months approximately. That trip to date. However, as we can see here, we can hear from this part, or from what Adam Smith tells us, it may maybe take 3 years, right? Because you need to find the seller and the one who wants to buy this product. However, the internet has of course made that very fast, and the faster ships have also helped a lot. Yes, so that's all that there is for reading today. It's not a lot, but nearly 2 pages, maybe even 2 pages actually. So that's good. I was very happy with reading. I'm also happy that I've made this podcast, as I thought might not, but this is my baby. It's the most important thing in my life. Okay, so what did we discuss today? Well, we're still in the capital and the employment of capital. And the first one is all countries to succeed need to employ capital into agriculture, manufacturing, and transportation. And the one that yields the most revenue is agriculture. So if you're investing money, where should you invest it? Well, first agriculture, then manufacturing, and thirdly transportation. And that also relates to our last point, which is home versus foreign trade, right? And there we discussed that if you're gonna do transportation, maybe at home is better because that would make it more frequent, that the capital exchange and the employment of capital would happen at a more frequent rate. It also relates to the idea that the US has been, at least in that time, exponentially growing. They have been growing very fast, and that's why, and that is, as argued by Adam Smith, is because they have only focused and solely focused on agriculture. They have not focused on manufacturing. They have left that to the British, and they are only focused on agriculture. Now, Adam Smith also gives us some uh, examples of other countries that have done the exact same thing, where he's giving us the example of Egypt, Hindustan, and China, who have all not made this exchange with the world and tried to do foreign trade, rather focused on themselves and then gotten some, and then maybe traded when someone came to them, but they never went, right? So in that sort, or not in that sort, but in that way, you are not employing capital into transportation, which is just a waste, right? Just stay at home and they will come to you if they need something or if they have any surplus. Now, the problem is then, well, what will happen if you have surplus of agriculture or manufacturing? Well, if you've already made the home trade, then there is something. It's not. I'm sorry. It's not that there is something, but then there is. Then there would be capital to be employed into transportation of foreign trade, I suppose. Uh, but but if you're doing foreign trade and you're not doing home trade, well, then you're really doing it the wrong way, because the money does not stay within your own country, and that's why it's so sad to hear about poor nations being firstly exploited for the raw material, because that's pretty stupid, right? And secondly, countries that is producing goods that they cannot afford themselves in their own country. That also doesn't make sense, right? What are you getting in exchange? If you're getting in exchange the products that you would be producing yourselves and a profit upon that, I still don't know if it makes sense. Does it? So let's take avocados for instance. Does it make sense that you're producing avocados? But can it really be that? Can it really be such that it is worth producing avocados and transporting them, or bananas for that sort? I'm just taking avocados because it's more expensive. So you're producing avocados and then you're sending them to Europe. Then in Europe, you're earning a profit that goes into producing these avocados plus an additional revenue. Does that really make sense? Or you're earning the price of the avocados such that if you had planted rice, for instance, you're getting that rice plus a profit upon that. Would that make sense? Yeah, it would. It would, with the great disparity between nations. However, the question is, why would they sell you this product for a cheap price, right? Why would they sell you this rice maybe for a cheap price? I don't know. Okay. However, after talking about the idea that every country should focus on their agriculture, or any country that wants to be rich quick or the fastest should be focusing on agriculture, we discussed this idea, and I quote, that's why maybe the argument with China focusing on manufacturing today makes sense. So capital is likely to increase the fastest when it is employed in the way that affords the greatest revenue to all the inhabitants of the country, as they will there as they will thus be enabled to make the greatest savings. Revenue of all inhabitants is proportionally the value of the annual produce of land and labor. So the idea is that you should employ capital in the ways such that you increase the income of the inhabitants, or in this case, the revenue, which is the income, supposedly. Right? Why? Well, because then they can save the most. And when they can save the most, they can also invest the most. So that's why. So what will be the question for next time? I think it's this idea with the avocados. I still can't get it out of my head. Is it sustainable? So is it sustainable that countries produce manufacturing products and import agricultural products? Good question. Good question. And that's basically what I had a small rant, let's call it, with the idea of Mao and what he did with the Industrial Revolution in China and the famine that happened. Right? That was the argument. Okay, so I think that's those were the new thoughts. That was the section about the new thoughts and the summary and the new question that we'll be answering tomorrow. And with that, I thank you all for staying tuned with me, and thanks for being here. And as per usual, I love you all. And also, as you know, I can't just leave you be like that. There's always a motivation at the end. And today's motivation is about having a routine. Now, today I discovered that while running. Uh, I usually discover these routines when I do something uh, or talk to someone, and there's something significant that that happens. Today, nothing significant happened while I was running, but I just remembered that I didn't have the energy to run. Firstly, before I ran, and also while I was running. So I cut off my brain. Didn't cut it off physically, but I mean that I shut it off, right? So I shut off my brain and I didn't think for some time. And I thought to myself after this period, because it could not last for very long, because I always think apparently, I thought, hmm, I know the benefits of running. It's good that I came out to run. It's good that I have this as a part of my routine and something that just happens naturally, whether I want to or I don't want to, and regardless of the circumstances. And that's also a part of this podcast. It happens, regardless of the circumstances, regardless if I have the energy or not, because my God, there are some days that I didn't want to do it. But I have to do it because I know the benefits of it. At least if I sit and think about them for a minute or two, I definitely see a benefit in talking to a camera, maybe even if no one is listening for 2 hours, and really thinking critically for 2 hours than not doing it at all. So have a routine in your life, have some things that you always do, and those things will keep you in check and keep you motivated and keep you going forward. And it's a way that you can shut off your preparing mind and you can just have them work for you. That's like when they say, make your money work for you by investing it, right? And then don't think about it. That's the same thing. Make a routine. So think a little bit, make a routine, invest your time in that, and then after which that will give you benefits uh, all the time. Okay, I think that's it for today. I'm even late to this arrangement that I have to go to. Doesn't matter. This was far more important. I'm sorry if you guys are watching this. But regardless, have a lovely day. See you tomorrow. Take care of yourself. And let's hope that COVID-19 doesn't reach 14 million by tomorrow. Okay? And as per usual, the blink and the blink. And see you tomorrow. I'll keep up my finger up now until I see it so I can end the presentation, the podcast.